Do you ever find yourself lying awake at 3 in the morning, replaying a conversation that happened 4 days ago, turning over a decision you already made, looking for the angle you missed, the thing you should have said differently, the outcome you didn't fully think through, and the more you try to stop, the louder it gets, until the thinking about the thinking becomes its own separate problem? Most people who experience this have been told the same thing at some point. Just stop overthinking. Relax. Let it go. And most people who've been told that know exactly how useful that advice is. Which is to say, not at all. Because if stopping were simply a matter of deciding to stop, you would have stopped already. Now here's what almost no one tells you about overthinking, and what most of the content you'll find on this topic completely misses. Overthinking is not a thinking problem. It was never a thinking problem. It's a feeling problem wearing the disguise of a thinking problem. And until you understand what it's actually doing and why your brain developed it in the first place, every strategy you try to manage it is working on the wrong level. By the end of this video, something about the way you understand your own mind is going to be permanently different. Let's get into it. The thing everyone gets wrong about overthinking. The conventional story goes something like this. Some people just think too much. They are analytical. They care too much about getting things right. Maybe they're perfectionists. Maybe they're just anxious by nature. Index, and the solution, therefore, is to think less, to practice letting go, to interrupt the spiral, to distract yourself until the loop stops running. That framing isn't just incomplete. It's almost exactly backwards. And it leads people to spend years treating the symptom while the actual cause keeps running quietly in the background, generating new loops as fast as the old ones are suppressed. Overthinking is not excess thinking. It is a protection strategy. It is something your brain learned to do, at some point in some context, because it worked. Because staying one step ahead of a bad outcome felt safer than being caught off guard by one. Because analyzing every possible angle of a situation gave you a sense of control in circumstances where control was genuinely uncertain. Your brain filed that away, and then it kept doing it, long after the original circumstances were gone. So where does it actually come from? This is where it gets specific, and this is the part worth sitting with. Because overthinking doesn't develop randomly. It develops in response to particular kinds of early experiences, and once you understand which ones, the pattern stops feeling like a character flaw and starts making a different kind of sense. The first and most common origin is an environment where outcomes were unpredictable. Not necessarily dangerous, just unpredictable. Where the emotional temperature of the people around you shifted in ways that were hard to anticipate. Where you learned early that reading situations carefully, staying alert to subtle signals, thinking through what might happen before it happened, was how you stayed safe, or kept things stable, or avoided something painful. If you grew up in that kind of environment, your brain did exactly what it was supposed to do. It became excellent at scanning for threat. It got very good at anticipating outcomes. It developed a hair-trigger sensitivity to uncertainty, because uncertainty was the thing that preceded the unpredictable thing. That's not a malfunction. That was adaptation. The problem is that the nervous system that learned to do this in one context doesn't automatically stop doing it when the context changes. If any of this is naming something you've been carrying for a long time without knowing exactly what to call it, hit the like button. Because having the right language for your own experience is the beginning of something, not just the end of a search. The anxiety connection, and why it's not what most people think. Here's a question worth sitting with. When you're in the middle of an overthinking spiral, does it feel like thinking? Or does it feel like something else entirely that thinking is just the shape of? Most people, when they really examine it, notice that the spiral doesn't feel intellectual. It feels urgent. It feels like something needs to be resolved, and there's a low-level alarm running underneath every loop that won't switch off until the resolution is found. That alarm isn't a thought. That's a feeling. Specifically, it's anxiety. And the thinking is the brain's attempt to do something about the anxiety by finding the answer that will finally make it quiet. This is the mechanism that almost nothing you'll read about overthinking explains clearly. The brain, under anxiety, interprets thinking as action. It feels like you're doing something about the problem. You're analyzing, you're preparing, you're covering angles. And while you're doing that, there's a temporary reduction in the raw panic of not knowing, which means the thinking gets reinforced. Your brain learns that when this feeling arises, thinking is what you do to manage it. And so the loop deepens. Save this video, because what we're about to get into is the part that most people who overthink have spent years trying to find. Not just the explanation, but the specific layer underneath it that actually needs addressing. You'll want to come back to this. The control illusion. There's something else happening inside the overthinking loop that is worth naming directly, because it's the piece that makes the pattern so persistent and so hard to interrupt from the outside. As overthinking creates the sensation of control. When you're turning something over repeatedly, examining it from every angle, planning for every contingency, it feels like you're managing the situation, like the thinking is doing something protective. Like if you just find the right frame, the right answer, the right way of looking at it, the uncertainty will resolve and you'll be safe. But here's what the research in cognitive psychology consistently shows. Rumination, the clinical term for repetitive looping thought, does not improve decision-making. It does not reduce actual risk. It does not generate better outcomes. What it does is reduce the felt sense of vulnerability in the short term, while actually increasing anxiety over time. The control is an illusion. The thinking feels productive, but it is running in place, burning energy without moving anywhere. And this is the deepest irony of overthinking. The strategy your brain developed to manage uncertainty is itself a generator of uncertainty. Every loop that doesn't resolve becomes evidence that the situation is unresolvable. Every angle examined reveals another angle. The more you think, the more there seems to be to think about. The mind that was trying to find safety has built itself a maze. What's actually underneath it? Here's the insight that tends to reframe everything, and it's worth reading slowly. The target of overthinking is almost never the thing being thought about. When you're lying awake replaying a conversation, you are not actually trying to resolve that conversation. When you're cycling through a decision you already made, you're not genuinely looking for new information about that decision. What you are doing, what the brain is actually trying to do, is manage a feeling of fundamental uncertainty about yourself, about whether you are safe, whether you are enough, whether the people around you are going to stay, whether the ground beneath you is solid. The conversation is just the surface the anxiety attaches to. The decision is just the shape the fear takes. Underneath the loop, what's actually running is a much older question, one that was formed before you had the language to name it, about whether the world is a place where things turn out okay for you specifically. That's the real reason you overthink everything. Not because you think too much, because some part of you learned, very early, that thinking was the only tool you had for managing a world that felt uncertain in ways you couldn't control. And that part is still doing its job, faithfully, exhaustingly. Long after you needed it to, the people who share this tend to share it with someone specific, someone they've watched run this same loop, in relationships, in decisions, in the quiet hours of the night, and who has never had anyone hand them a framework for why. If that person came to mind, this is worth sending. What actually helps, and why most advice misses it? Understanding the mechanism doesn't automatically stop the loop, but it changes your relationship to it. And that change in relationship is where the real work begins. Because you cannot effectively address something you are still at war with. The interventions that research supports for chronic overthinking are not thought-stopping techniques. They are not distraction strategies. They are approaches that work on the feeling level rather than the thinking level, that teach the nervous system gradually and repeatedly that uncertainty is survivable, that the absence of a resolved answer is not the same as danger, that the ground can be uncertain and you can still be okay on it. That's a different project entirely from just trying to think less. It's a deeper one, and it tends to require more than a single video to do justice to, which is exactly what this channel keeps going back into. There's a video on here that goes directly into the nervous system patterns underneath chronic anxiety and what it actually takes to address them at the root. That's the next logical step from what we've covered today, and it's worth following through on. If what we've gone through today has named something you've been experiencing but couldn't quite see clearly, that recognition matters. And if you feel like the overthinking has gotten to a place that's genuinely affecting your quality of life, please don't hesitate to speak to a mental health professional. What we've described today is real, it's common, and it responds to the right kind of support. Drop a comment with the moment in this video where something clicked, the specific idea that reframed something you'd been trying to think your way through for a long time. Those answers tell the rest of this community something important, that they're not uniquely broken, that this pattern has a shape and the shape is recognizable, and recognizing it is where something new begins. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching.